Hello everyone, thanks for coming to my talk and thanks for having me again. My name is SITNIK and today I'm going to share my story with you. The point of this presentation isn't to show you that I'm a cool guy doing some cool stuff. The point of this presentation is to show you how an average C# developer like me could grow thanks to open source and how contributing to open source is awesome. Something about myself, I work on the .NET team at Microsoft and I contribute a lot to open source. I work remotely, so it's very hard for me to differentiate when I do it at work, when I do it after work. But I have the bad habit of fixing every bug that I hit. Recently, I have fixed a 20-year-old bug in a native library where I was just supposed to improve the performance of string.starts with. I maintain two projects, benchmark.net and awesome.net performance list. Have any of you ever heard of it? Awesome. So let's get it started. Every presentation about open source starts with slides about the history of open source. The most important thing about the history of open source is that you can make your own history. It doesn't matter what other people did. It doesn't matter what big companies did. It's about what you are going to do. You are the most important part of the history of open source. But first of all, you need to open your eyes. And I have opened mine in 2015 when I have read a blog post from Aaron Stannard. And in his blog post, Aaron explains what his small startup based in Los Angeles did in order to develop a single system in .NET. So they had to extend Fluent Cassandra with one feature. They had to port few algorithms to C#, which wasn't big. But they also had to invent a high-performance server-side socket library. It was before Kestrel. Moreover, it was before Microsoft Orleans, so they also had to port Akka from Java to .NET. And in his blog post, Aaron asks a lot of questions, and the one that has triggered me was, what are all .NET developers doing? Writing Hello World? Why nobody needed this before? And I was like, hell no, I'm not writing Hello World applications. Back then, I was working at a company where we were writing applications for trading energy, for preventing blackouts in entire Europe, using .NET. I was like, I'm not doing Hello World. And then I have opened the packages.config file, which was the thing back then, and I have checked what kind of software am I using. And it turned out that I was using Autofact and Inject for dependency injection. I was using XUnit and NUnit to write tests. I was using Dapper to connect to the database and get some data. I was using JSON.NET, obviously, SignalR, and all these things were open source back then. So is there any person here who is not using open source when you think of your dependencies? This is what I thought. And the next question that I have asked myself was, have I ever contributed in any way? So have any of you ever maintained an open source project? Please raise your hands. Awesome, for maintainers. Who has implemented a new feature? The same people. Who has fixed a bug? Awesome. Who has improved the performance? Who has improved the docs? Remember that this is very important. If you have an open source tool that has no docs, most probably nobody is going to use the features. Who has reported a bug? Awesome. Reporting a bug is a very welcome way of contributing to open source project. As a maintainer, I very often see people complaining on Twitter about a bug in open source software. So most probably, if you complain on Twitter, it's unlikely that the maintainers of the given product are following you on Twitter. So if you want to get something fixed, you need to report the bug and provide a good repro case. And this is one of the ways of contributing to open source. And now, who has introduced a bug in an open source library? Obviously not on purpose, but it also counts. So at this moment of time, I was completely anonymous .NET developer. I knew I wanted to contribute to make a difference, but I had no idea how to start. I didn't know any other contributors. I wasn't dreaming about speaking at big conferences like NDC, Tekorama, .next, or here today at the Update conference. Not to speak about having a beer with my gurus or about working on the .NET team. And the same week, one of my very few gurus has started a new project called Slice. And Slice was a prototype of Span, which I have been talking about here last year. And one of my favorite ways of learning is by reading other people's source code. So I have cloned Joe's code, and I was just read it from the top to the bottom. And I have found few places for improvements. And I was like, okay, so this is the moment when I'm going to do my first contribution. But the problem was that I didn't know how to get started. So what I did, I went to YouTube and I put how to contribute to open source in the search bar. I found a video. The video was very short, and I'm going to demo it to you right now. So the first thing that you need to do, I would like to contribute to Czech docs of .NET. First of all, you need to create the fork. Once the fork is created, you are going to get your own copy of the repository. And the next thing that you need to do is to clone the source code. So you just get the address to your clipboard and run git clone. Oops. Most probably it's going to take a while because the Wi-Fi is not very fast. So I'm going to show you an alternative. Like, I won't be using a local copy. The version for very lazy people, which is including myself. So I can create a branch in a GitHub repository from GitHub UI. So I can call it demo. Once we create a branch, I can find a file that I want to edit. And I'm a very pedantic person, and I don't like the fact that there is a space before this dot. Okay, I just want to keep it very simple, so to focus on the fact of contributing instead of the problem that I'm trying to solve. And over here, I can click edit the file. Where is my dot? It's over here. Now I'm going to say minor pedantic doc improvement. Awesome, and now I'm pushing to my branch. So that's it. Once you push the changes to the branch of your fork, you go to the upstream repository, a new button shows up, compare and pull request. Over here you can see a preview. So what you have changed, I really encourage you to read it before clicking the create button. And now I'm just going to say that it's for the purpose of demo. And I click the button. So I have just created a new pull request. So as you can see, this is very, very simple. And Git is still cloning stuff. So I won't cover the console pathway, but you know, GitHub is using Git. I assume that you have experience with Git, so you just create a branch, create commits and push, and then you go to GitHub page of your upstream repo and click the button twice. So my first contribution was very simple. I was like, hey, maybe we should run benchmarks in release, not in debug. I have found a way to improve the code performance. So I have applied these changes and created a pull request. First of all, I was very, very excited. And for some reason, I forgot that there is a time difference between Europe and US. And I was expecting Joe to provide me feedback in something like 5 minutes. And honestly, I was so excited because I grew up by reading Joe's book as a software engineer that I couldn't fall asleep. I was hitting the refresh button in my phone like crazy. And honestly, I had to drink 2 beers in order to chill out and finally fall asleep. And the next day, I got the review. And the first lesson that I have learned is that there is a contributing.md file in most of the repositories which explains the rules and practices and style guidelines for given repo. And whenever you are contributing to an existing repository, you should not try to change these rules like I did. You should follow the existing rules. But the most important thing that I have realized then was that open source gives you the possibility to get a code review from your guru. So I grew up reading Joe's book, for example, Concurrent Programming on Windows, and now he just gave me a code review. And obviously, these things here are only related to the coding guidelines, but I have also learned a lot about different things. And to me, this has been always the biggest advantage of doing open source, like working with the best in the industry. So once you have decided that you want to contribute, you should choose the right project. I really encourage you to search for something exciting. Most probably you have been coding for 8 hours at work. Now you got back home and you want to spend some time on open source. What is exciting? It depends on you. Please keep in mind that the possibilities in open source are, there is basically no boundaries. You have compiler operating systems, VMs, libraries, tools that you use, so you can choose whatever you want. Just to give you an example, maybe you would like to do more DevOps stuff, but at work you have to use some old CI, and you would like to get to know with GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps or Travis CI, then you can find a repository of a tool that you are using. It doesn't have CI configured, and you can do it. It's your free time, so it's up to you what you are going to do. I also encourage you to search for the tools that you are familiar with, because then the testing will be easier for you, and also you'll be able to say if it's a bug or a feature. Also, you need to make sure that given project is looking for help. So some projects are open, but in a read-only way. So if you cannot create an issue or a pull request, it most probably means that the source is there just to allow you for reading it. However, this is the minority of the projects. Next thing, you need to make sure that the project is active, so you can just go to the history and search for the latest commit. If latest commit was merged 4 years ago or a few years ago, it most probably means that the project is dead, and if you create a pull request, there is a high chance that you won't even get a response. And remember that you are doing this in your free time, so you should try to avoid wasting your free time. You also need to make sure that you are okay with the license. There is a license.md file which describes everything. And when it comes to starting a new project as your first contribution, I don't encourage you to do that. First of all, I can see a lot of people trying to duplicate and fighting with existing successful projects. If you have a great idea for improving serialization to JSON performance, then it's better to contribute to existing project, because if you want to start your own project, it's not only about code, it's also about docs, tests, CI, and marketing, so building an entire full product. Once you have selected the project, you need to find the issue. On GitHub, issues can be marked with labels. One of the labels that we care about is up for grabs. So there is a convention that the maintainer should mark issues which are relatively easy to start with as up for grabs. So you just filter by up for grabs label and find an issue. Once you have found the issue, you should start asking questions. First of all, can I take this issue? Like, you should make sure that nobody else is currently working on this issue. Moreover, is there anything that I need to know before I start coding? In open source, we have two kinds of projects. Some of them are backed by big companies with full-time employees working on them, but some are kind of pet projects of some people. And very often you will find issues that don't have descriptions. And sometimes maintainers know something that you should know as well. Maybe, for example, there is new API coming to .NET Core in the next release, but it hasn't been published yet, so it's currently impossible to implement this feature. So ask questions before you start coding, and if you want to send a new feature or improve the performance, it's really great if you start the discussion first. When the code gets merged, the responsibility is transferred to maintainers, and this is why maintainers may not be willing to accept every feature. Maybe I very often see people proposing features that will be meeting only their needs. And also when it comes to performance, it's great if you start the discussion first, because typically improving performance increases the complexity, and you should make sure that the maintainers are okay with that before you spend your time on coding. When it comes to working with Git, I have also a few recommendations. So first of all, in open source you can get rejected. So your changes might get rejected. This is why you should be always working on a branch. Because if you push something to your master branch and your PR gets rejected, then you end up with master in a dirty state. And then you need to do some hacks to get it clean. So always create a branch, and also make sure that you configure your email correctly. I very often get questions from people like, hey Adam, I have been contributing to benchmark.net, but I'm not on the contributors list. So GitHub is using the email from your Git config to recognize you. And as you can see on my setting page, I have my private email, my email from my previous job, and also an email from my current job, because I did misconfigure that. So honestly, I believe that the best way is to always set the private email. Another thing, when you are pushing big changes, typically maintainers are going to review commit by commit. So it's great if you can keep them somehow logically separated. But it's similar to the thing that you are doing at work. Like, just make sure that your commits make sense. And contributing can be a part of your daily job routine. So, have you found a bug in open source library? First of all, you need to report it. It's increasing the chance from 0 to non-zero that it's going to get fixed, and provide a good repro case. But now, is it blocking your job? And I assume that you have a backlog of work items and you are always working on the highest priority task. So you are currently being blocked by a bug in an open source library for doing the most important thing for you. So why don't you just fix it? Unblock yourself. What if you need a new feature? And when I was doing my first big conference, I met one very famous consultant who is MVP, Pluralsight author, book author, has dozens of thousands of followers on Twitter. And I asked him, like, so when you recommend something to your customers, do they listen to you? And he said no. But he told me that whenever he connects the decision, the possible options with money, then they do. So you can ask your manager, hey, can I work on this open source feature? But to increase the chances that you are going to get allowed, you should give your manager the options. So first of all, you can write similar project from scratch, introduce new bugs, and spend days, weeks, or months on doing this. So this is the most expensive solution. The second alternative, you can buy a paid product, pay for the license, switch to the new product, and most probably also spend some time. Or the third option, you can clone the repo and implement the feature yourself. Money-wise, this is the best option. It's the cheapest. So I really encourage you to at least give it a try. And you should just do it. Many people say that it's easier to ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. But as I said previously, contributing to open source is also about getting rejected. When the code gets merged, the responsibility is moved to maintainers. So nobody is going to ask you to fix a bug that you have introduced in a PR 1 year ago. This is why very often maintainers will say no to very complex changes, to things that are against their policies, ideologies, whatever. But who of you knows who Ben Adams is? Awesome, quite a few people. So Ben Adams is one of the .NET ecosystem superstars. He's contributing a lot to a lot of projects. He's very nice and very smart person. And when I was working on the first version of this presentation in 2017, he had 5 PRs open to Kestrel and 113 merged. And how do you think how many were rejected? 122. So contributing to open source is about getting rejected as well. When you get rejected, don't give up. Keep doing your job. to decrease chances for getting rejected, you should start the discussion first. And everybody gets rejected. I work on the CoreFX team, I send PRs to CoreFX, I have the right permission, and every week I get rejected by my friends because they know something that I didn't know and I need to improve. So how do we get started? Choose an exciting, active, and truly open project, pick one of the issues, or wait until something bites you at work, or just wait for the right moment. Please try to avoid common Git mistakes, follow the existing standards, and you will get rejected. Everybody does, don't give up. Oh, I can see somebody taking picture. So let's talk about the advantages now. So first of all, when you become a contributor, you can get a lot of cool software for free for open source purposes. So you can get Visual Studio license, ReSharper license, all of the profilers, all of the CI, you can get PostSharper license, so you can build a really cool toolchain for free. The next thing is that open source gives you the possibility to work on anything that you want. So for example, before I started contributing to open source, I was developing .NET applications for 8 years, like WinForms, WebForms, WPF, WCF, console apps. But I have never been developing a library that was used by other developers. And open source gives you the possibility to do whatever you want, and by doing new things, you can learn. For example, when you're writing a library, you need to think about backward compatibility. When you are developing an application, you can rename all your methods anytime you want. You don't care what is public, what is internal. You don't think too much about what type of arguments the method is accepting. However, when you are developing a library, you need to think about all of these things up front because you cannot change them later. So this is forcing you to think. Moreover, when you are developing an application, you typically have customers from one segment. Most probably, if you're a .NET developer, these are people who run .NET on Windows. But your library is going to be consumed by mono people, by .NET Core users. Moreover, people are going to use it on Linux, on Mac OS. And this is, again, forcing you to learn new things and to think very wide and getting the big picture. Another thing that you need to consider when you're writing libraries, versioning. So this is something that is hard, and most probably as a person who works at Microsoft, I should not be speaking about versioning best practices. You should also write some release notes and docs. Remember, writing docs is very important, and for example, when I was an app developer, I was never writing docs for my apps because my manager was doing the demos for the customer. So I had to, for example, learn GitHub Markdown. But as I said previously, open source gives you the ultimate possibilities and you can challenge yourself. If you feel like, hey, I'm super smart, my current job is very simple, it's like programming ABC, then you can try yourself in open source. For example, my first contribution to benchmark.net was really crazy. So I was contributing to Slice, then it was moved to CoreFX Lab. And I used my favorite tool, benchmark.net, to measure the improvements that I wanted to add. And it turned out that the tool didn't work. And back then, I didn't really know what .NET Core was, except of the fact that it's going to be new cross-platform.net. So I actually just left a comment in benchmark.net repository. Hey, I'm going to take a look into that. It took me 4 weeks to implement that. And back then, there was no .NET CLI. There was a thing called NX. And basically, there was no blog post, no knowledge about .NET Core whatsoever. And anytime I was hitting a bug, and I was putting the exception message to Google, the only answer I was getting was source code of given tool on GitHub. And very often, I was ending up like debugging benchmark.net in one Visual Studio, debugging NX in another Visual Studio, and debugging .NET Core in another Visual Studio. So I have learned a lot. And at work, I was always working on something simple and always in my comfort zone. Another example was when I decided to contribute few new methods to span, when span was still a prototype in Core CLR in span of the branch. So first of all, I had to learn how to build .NET Runtime, how to debug it, how to debug the native part, how to debug the managed part, how to run my program using my version of .NET Runtime. Moreover, I ran into a situation when I needed to use a feature that was available from IL level, but not available from C# level. So I actually had to write a C++ code that was generating IL on the fly to overcome C# limitations. And by doing all of this crazy stuff, I have learned a lot of things in a very short matter of time. Have you ever read a book called My Job Went to India? So the author of the book is giving some advices like how to be so good that even if your company is closing the development office or moving it to a different country, you stay. And one of the advices is to be always the worst on the team, which means to work with people who are better than you. And during only my first year of contributions to open source, I had the pleasure to learn from Joe Duffy, the author of Concurrent Programming on Windows, one of the architects of the Midori operating system. I also had the pleasure to learn from Vladimir Sadov, who back then was working on the Roslyn team as a principal engineer. And before I started contributing to CoreFX Lab, I was thinking of myself of a C# expert. And then I have sent very simple PR to CoreFX Lab, adding few methods. And Vladimir has left like 40 comments. And I have realized that I basically know nothing about C#. But in the good way, because I was learning at the same time. Another person that I had the pleasure to learn was Krzysztof Swalina. So Krzysztof is author of one of the most frequently cited books on Stack Overflow, the framework design guidelines. I have learned a lot from Krzysztof, also about designing libraries and types. I had also the pleasure to work a lot with Andrzej Akinshin. Andrzej has a PhD in mathematics. He's very familiar with C#. He is proficient with Java, Kotlin, moreover C++. I was a witness when he was writing code in assembly in Notepad. He compiled it and it worked out of the box. And by the way, a few years ago, he published a book about JavaScript. So in open source, you get the possibility to work with these people and to learn from them. And another person that I have to mention is Jan Kotas. If you ever go to .NET Runtime repository, you can see that Jan is the top contributor. He knows everything about .NET, but he's not only smart, he's also very kind and also very eager to always explain everything to me. And still, after all these years, even if I'm sending a pull request with a single line of change in core CLR, Jan is always finding a way to make it better. And initially, when I was sending my first pull request, I was getting like 40 to 20 comments from Jan. Now I get something between 2 and 5. So 2 means awesome, 5 means okay. And I'm sure that if I ever got to the point that I get 0 and he just accepts the PR, it's going to mean that somebody has hacked his account. And now, what if it's true that you are the average of the 5 people that you spend most of the time with? And what if it's true about our developer experience? So who would like to be an average of these 5 people? Because I would definitely be very happy to be the average. And open source also gives you the possibility to believe in yourself. How do you know if you are good or not? Most probably you have been working in your current company for a few years, very often for a few years on the same project, and you are like kind of, I don't know my value outside of the company. I don't know if I'm good or not. Maybe you're an expert in a very niche domain and you simply don't know. So open source gives you the possibility to pick any project, maybe from your dream job company, and just solve an issue. So this is a great way of building your confidence, because the more projects you get familiar with, you just download the code, start reading the docs, get familiar with the code, you start getting the big picture, and then you start solving problems. And after a few projects like this, you're like, hey, I'm a good software engineer. I can do it, whatever it is. And one very important thing, most of the people are afraid of contributing to open source. It's perfectly fine. First of all the maintainers are very happy that you want to help. So nobody is going to scream at you because something was not perfect. But if you are still afraid of saying it loud that, hey, I want to work on this issue, you can just create a fork, clone the repo, and then do some commits locally. And now if you succeed, you push your changes to your branch, and then you create a pull request. If you fail, you don't tell anyone, you still remain in your comfort zone, and nobody knows that you have failed. However, believe me, like contributing to open source is not different than doing things at work, so it's also software engineering. So I'm sure that you are going to succeed. For me, contributing to open source also opened the doors for speaking at big conferences. So for example, in 2017, as I said, I was completely anonymous. I had 2 followers on Twitter, my mom and my girlfriend. And I got accepted to speak at NDC. And later, all of other doors open. So if speaking at big conference is your dream, then most probably, if you become a contributor to some cool project that everybody wants to listen, then you became a perfect candidate that can tell your story, share the knowledge, and tell more about the product. However, it's not the silver bullet. I still get rejected quite frequently, even if I have a lot of open source contributions. Another great thing is that open source gives you the possibility to do some pair programming with the best. Just to give you an example, when I was Microsoft customer, Kestrel team was using benchmark.net a lot, and they have reported few bugs. And I was going for a business trip to Redmond as a customer, and I have sent a message to Cesar saying, hey, you know, I will be in Redmond, maybe we should do some pair programming together. And he invited me for the lunch. We had the lunch, and after the lunch, he took me to the ASP.NET team building, introduced me to the entire ASP.NET team, and then we sit together and solved all of the problems. Again, without open source, I don't think that it would be possible. Imagine that some stranger is sending you a text message that, hey, I want to have a lunch with you and then meet your team. Would you let me into the building? .NET Foundation, it's a foundation that is focused on helping people to develop open source software. They provide repositories with help in the form of paying for the logo, for the hosting. Moreover, they from time to time send you some gifts. My first gift from them was a cool mug, a notebook, and a note. And as you can see, my rabbit was very happy. She was very happy to open the carton box. And just a side note, back then when I was posting something smart on Twitter, I was getting something like 5 retweets, 20 likes. However, when I posted a picture with my rabbit, I got like 400 likes. So, yeah, animals are cool. Also, open source gives you the possibility to get behind the closed doors. Because when people see that you are doing something cool and you have some feedback, they start inviting you to very often some closed discussion groups. And for example, back then, I got invited to be one of the members of the .NET Runtime closed discussion group, together with people like Ben Adams and Mark Gravel, and Omarium, who is another open source contributor. And contributing also gives some advantages for your employer. So, you learn new things all the time. You use these things at work, so you are doing your job in a better way. You're saving time, you're saving money, and you are building a network. At some point of time, so many people were using benchmark.net that I had a friend in almost every product that I was using. So anytime I was hitting a bug, like even in things like databases, for example, people from RavenDB were using benchmark.net, so when I ran into a RavenDB issue, I just send them a text message and they have fixed the bug in 24 hours. So you can build a great network. Moreover, you can promote your company by doing great things in public, and where good developers want to go, where good developers are. And when I was doing the first version of this presentation in Moscow, the organizer of Update conference, Tomasz, told me that there are some companies in Czech Republic that pay well-known open source contributors just to sit in the office, do whatever they want, but they have to say it loud that they work here. So they bring talent. So you constantly learn a lot, you step out of your comfort zone, you challenge yourself, you start to believe in yourself, you are building a huge network. And also a thing that I haven't mentioned, you can have a beer with your gurus, which is awesome. But when you become the maintainer, contributing to open source starts a little bit to remind you your work. But the first rule is that you should always be nice no matter what. Some people, you might not even be aware of this, you might be the guru for them. So you cannot ever be an asshole to anyone, even to very annoying users. You should also be responding fast, so people are not losing hope when they send a PR. You should be fixing the bugs first. You should be writing the docs, release notes, and you will learn that reviewing source code is very often harder than just writing the code yourself. Another part of being maintainer are huge expectations that people have. Some of the people expect that you are going to fix the bug that they have reported in 24 hours. And if they ask for a feature, you should do it also the same day. Moreover, eventual failures are public. So if you introduce a really bad bug to a well-known open source library and then bad things happen, then you will be famous in the bad way. And also there are special users. So one of the examples is like, people create a bug issue, they don't provide stack trace, then they don't describe how to reproduce the problem. And I'm like, thank you. I still don't know how to reproduce the problem. Moreover, I remember when one of the users of benchmark.net has reported a bug with a stack trace, and in the stack trace there was a full explanation of what he should do with a link to the docs. And my response was like, hey, there is a link, could you please read it? And the person was like, I don't have time, could you please tell me? So special users happen, and when you are not getting paid for that, it's the bad part of open source. And another problem that you have when you start contributing to open source, so it becomes addictive at some point of time, because you have unlimited stream of interesting problems to solve, and some of them require you to think for an hour, for a minute, some of them for a week, some for a month. And if you get into bigger things, you can even need more thinking to solve some problems. And to me, it very often happens that I start thinking about a problem and I still exist in the real life and I do some stupid things. So for example, when I was once thinking about one problem that I wanted to solve in Courseullar, I went for a shopping in the local store and I went back home with the basket from the store in my hand. When I got back, the ladies at the store were really laughing at me. So this is the price you pay for doing cool stuff. And this has one big disadvantage, because it's really hard to fall asleep when you are thinking about some very complex problem and you know that other people are waiting for the solution and you are so close to getting it done. And yeah, and this very often results in a shorter sleep. Motivation. A lot of people are asking me how to motivate yourself to do open source. And a lot of people are telling me that they blame themselves for not contributing. So first of all, not contributing is perfectly fine. Not contributing and blaming yourself for not contributing is a bad thing for you. So if you don't contribute, it's okay. But if you would like to motivate yourself, one of my most successful ways of motivating myself is that in a repository that is maintained by some people that I truly respect, I put it publicly in a comment like, hey, I'm going to work on this. So it's creating a kind of a hook on me. And whenever these people are asking me like, hey, Adam, what's the progress? What's the progress? It's different compared to if my colleague would ask me, like, hey, Adam, how are you doing? How is this issue? So if your guru is asking you, hey, what's the status of this issue? It's forcing you to kind of finish it. And my first pull request to Coursera, I was a few times very close to give up because it was so complex and I had to learn so many things. But thanks to the fact that Krzysztof and Jan were asking, like, hey, Adam, how is it doing? We want to merge it to master. It was pushing me. When people believe in you, it's much harder to give up. Another way I motivate myself. So you do open source for free, so nobody is going to pay for that. And I'm, for example, an adult fan of Lego, and the Lego sets are expensive. So very often I give myself some gifts. I'm like, hey, this Lego set costs $500, I should not buy it. It's bad for my home budget, I want to start family, etc., etc. But if I'm able to solve this open source problem, then I'm going to buy it myself. So I could show you my Lego collection, and each of the sets come from an open source feature. Like, I bought them myself, but by doing this, I kind of have an excuse, and my fiancé is not complaining about this. And now let's talk about some things that people are afraid to ask during the talk, but very often ask me when I'm done in private. So first of all, when you contribute to a lot of cool stuff, and you are back work, and you have to do something simple, then over the time, you lose the motivation to do simple things. So open source is very addictive when it comes to that. Moreover, do people do open source at work? So very often I get into the situation that I get a bug report somewhere, and I'm like, hey, it's a single line of code. So I admit that I spend 10 to 15 minutes every day like fixing simple bugs in the repos that I maintain. And people do open source at work, and also it's really hard to notice what you are doing because you still have Visual Studio opened and Git extensions. So, do contributors get a lot of job offers? Before I got the job offer from Microsoft, within my first 2 years of contributing to open source, I got 2 job offers. Both were from bots. So, in .NET ecosystem, it's still not common for the recruiters to search for the candidates on GitHub. Compared to LinkedIn, the number of job offers is much smaller. Will it be easier to get a better job? Definitely. Why? Because when you are contributing to open source, then you have a living record of getting things done. And when you are doing this in your free time, it means that you are very motivated and you are truly passionate about software. The only other requirement that is left is that you must have no issues with communicating to other people. So once I have started contributing to open source, then every interview was very easy. I remember when I even once went to an interview and the guy said something like, we are going to skip the technical part because we have seen your GitHub profile and you know more about .NET and C# than we do, but we are curious about few things. And then they started asking me out of curiosity about some things related to parallel programming, for example. And this was the technical part of the interview. Will you get an MVP award? So just contributing to open source is not enough to become MVP most of the time. So you also have to do other things like blogging, talking about products, etc., etc. So just contributing is not the way. There are some exceptional people, but they contribute a lot, like a lot. And will you get paid for doing open source? Unfortunately, no. One good example, have you ever heard of ImageSharp library? It's a library for working with images in .NET. So they have more than 2,000 stars on GitHub, millions of downloads, and when they have started gathering money via some sponsorship websites, they have gathered $10 in 2 weeks. So you are not going to get paid for doing open source. Another part of the things that people are afraid to ask, do experienced contributors always know where to start? No, at least myself, I very often have no idea how to start working on a given issue, and I just dig in, read docs, read books, watch some talks, ask people questions, put things together, and then eventually I come up with a solution. Do you need to be a Git expert to become a contributor? No. All you need to know is Git clone, creating branch, creating commit, pushing, and maybe solving the merge conflicts and synchronizing with the upstream repository. So by using 5 to 7 Git commit commands, you can be very efficient contributor. And do experienced contributors always succeed? No. Like, failure and being rejected is part of contributing to open source. Everybody gets rejected. So, the disadvantages. It's consuming a lot of time, people have huge expectation, it's get addictive, and you are doing this for free. And you have to write docs and release notes. Now I'm going to talk about the best moments of my contributions to open source. So the day when I got right access to my favorite tool, benchmark.net. Back then I was working in the office full of people, and I make really loud sound of joy. And people were like, Adam, what happened? And I was like, I got the right access to benchmark.net. I can push to master now. Obviously, pushing to master is a bad idea, but it was an amazing feeling. Another great moment when I was attending a conference when one of my gurus was live using a feature that I have implemented. Another cool stuff, when I have seen the results of Tech Empower and I knew that the ASP.NET team, the Kestrel team, was using benchmark.net a lot to measure the improvements. And when I was seeing these charts, I was like, hey, I have helped these people get there. So also a lot of motivation. Another great thing, something that I didn't realize before it happened. So by contributing to open source, you can make a lot of good friends. And when you get older, it's simply harder to make new friends. And for me, open source was a way of getting new, great friends. And another thing that happened to me was getting a dream job. So I didn't want to move to US for various reasons, and I always wanted to work on the .NET, so I was kind of doing this for free and contributing to the tools. And I thought that working remotely on Microsoft is simply impossible. But with the amount of contributions I made, it turned out that yes, it was completely possible. So this is another way and another benefit. And something that is always surprising me, possibility to influence others. So from time to time, some people come to me at conferences or meetups and say, hey, Adam, I have seen your talk about open source. I started contributing. I learned new stuff. Or people are like, hey, I saw your comments. I didn't know that it's going to be possible to implement this. I have learned a lot by reading your source code. So doing cool things in public gives you very unique possibility to influence others. However, it's very hard to get used to it. So let's summarize my entire presentation. The plan minimum, I would say, is that whenever you hit a bug in open source library, you report an issue and provide a good repro case. I really encourage you to try to contribute to something exciting at least once, just to get the taste of open source. Contributing can be a part of your daily job routine if you know how to talk to your manager. Everybody gets rejected. You will be rejected, but don't give up. You can benefit a lot. You can skyrocket your experience and knowledge. However, you are not going to get paid for it. These are the sources that I have used in my presentation. And now we have 3 minutes for questions. Yes, please. Sorry, you are going to get a mic.
Thank you very much. So thanks a lot for the presentation. It's very inspiring. But I wanted to ask, let's say you have a tool or library that you think could be useful, so you just go ahead and make it public, push it to GitHub, whatever. How would you recommend it would be the good way to promote this tool so that people are aware of it, they know they exist?
Yeah, so first of all, I would think first about the licensing before you push anything to GitHub. And once you have the product there, I would create some good, simple docs, like the README page should be like 1-2 pages. And then I would ask some well-known people like Scott Hanselman to retweet the idea. Just to give you a good example, benchmark.net had 400 stars on GitHub, and then when Scott Hanselman invited Matt Warren to talk about benchmark.net during his podcast, we jumped over 1,000 within a week. So I would ask some influencers for support, and because it's open source tool and you are doing something great for other people, I'm sure that everybody is going to forward the information.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. I'm here today and tomorrow, so if you want, please feel to catch me. Thank you very much.